You're listening to the Picks from the Paddock Turf Talk podcast.
As they come to the last fence in the National, and Red Rum with a tremendous chance of winning his third National. He jumps it clear of Churchtown Boy. He's getting the most tremendous cheer from the crowd. They're winning him home now. The 12-year-old Red Rum being preceded only by loose horses, being chased by Churchtown Boy. Eyecatcher has moved into third with a Pilgarlic fourth. They're coming to the elbow. There's a furlong now between Red Rum and his third Grand National triumph. And he's coming up to the line to win it like a fresh horse in great style. His hats off and a tremendous reception. You've never heard one like it at Liverpool. Red Rum wins the National.
A horse who is pure class, Frankel, has destroyed them from halfway. An amazing performance, and Frankel heads towards the line to make every single yard in the Guineas and win it well.
Hurricane Fly, who's opening up now, approaching the final flight, coming towards it now. It's Hurricane Fly, leads by two. From Countrywide Flame in second, who's rallied. Back in third as well as Rock on Ruby. Stay on the hill. Hurricane Fly, driven out to the line. Can he regain his title? He can. The second in history. Hurricane Fly is the champion over again.
You are listening to the Turf Talk podcast, as always, with me, Rory Paddock, Matt, who's now become a regular fixture, and the bloke I can't get rid of, Chris. Episode 3 of this season, boys. Obviously, we had the action last Saturday, and obviously Sunday there was a bit of action as well. Saying that, not to mention the all-weather Group 1 on the Friday evening. We'll keep it short and snappy. A lot to get into. We'll start with what was the feature race. You got called out on social media, Chris, for saying that Le Bagois had, and I quote, fucking no chance. Well, you were proven right. Actually, you know what? Just play the clip. Right, yeah. Thanks for listening.
Mate, that Labago Roy's got fucking no chance. I am telling you now. It's going to get absolutely arsehole.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the groundwater helped her. It was really heavy and she went right up the inside. She was a ridiculous price, in my opinion, on the basis of her form. I know she's beaten some fancy types, but at novice level, you know, the likes of Top of the Game and Lostintranslation, they had bigger targets last term. So to see her going off around 94 or 5-2 was a scandalous price. The race itself ended up falling apart, I thought. I mean, Ballyoptic, Strong Stayer, heavily backed, Nigel Twiston-Davis horse. It's not a big surprise. And Elegant Escape, who did what he usually does. I mean, he made mistakes and got towards the rear. I think Matt mentioned last week he could have backed him in running at massive prices and had a run for your money. He called that perfectly. And ASO came third. He travelled up really well again. He's done this quite a few times now, ASO, and I'm not convinced with that horse's attitude under pressure. You could say he didn't stay, but he was absolutely travelling all over them. So he'd be one I'd be wary of going forward, especially if you can't get an each-way price. And definitely Red, desperately disappointing. I don't know what happened with him, but I think it's one of them races where you could set fire to the form. I don't trust it one bit. I don't think it will stand the test of time. Certainly not around the finishing positions. There'll be winners out of the race, of course, but it was a disappointing renewal, and she was an absolute layer.
Matt, where do you go with the disappointing favourite from here on? Do you think it potentially should? I hate to say it, and I hope I'm not right, but potentially a one-season wonder.
Well, I don't know, but she's quite a big scopy mare. I mean, she was undoubtedly disappointing. Chris obviously didn't fancy her, and he was proved quite right, wasn't he? She was never happy during the race. The interview that Warren Greatrex gave before the race was definitely not exuding confidence. He mentioned he was worried about the ground. He also said that he'd just like it to be over. It wasn't really full of confidence about her, but I'm always prepared to give a horse a chance with one off run. But given the massive weight allowance she got for being a mare, and given her record fresh, which has been exemplary for the previous few seasons, undoubtedly was disappointing. I mean, she never looked a winner at any stage during that race. So yeah, I mean, back to the drawing board to a certain extent with her, but Ballyoptic, I mean, slightly surprising winner for me, albeit he was in form obviously after his win at Chepstow. Nigel Twiston-Davis is the man in the autumn this time of year. These horses are always fit and ready to go at this time of year. Elegant Escape, as we predicted, probably found the trip a bit too sharp, was probably helped by the softer ground, and he ran his usual honest race, getting outpaced down the back and then staying on again. Chris mentioned ASO, a horse I really like. My first thought was that he blatantly didn't stay. He travelled like the winner turning in. But I guess you can't deny the fact that it's not the first time he's done that. He's travelled there. He did it at Cheltenham, and that was over a shorter trip, and still couldn't get past Frodon. So I guess you could put two and two together and think maybe he doesn't go through with it. But yeah, I mean, I think a combination of the 3 miles on the soft ground probably put paid to his chance. Like I said, he looked the winner 2 out, but he just never got there, and it was the Twiston-Davis horse that ground it out ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, last 2 questions on the race before we move on, chaps. Chris, I'll come to you first. Ballyoptic, do you think we're perhaps doing it a disservice by saying the form book's nothing, and potentially that could, I can't see it going on to be some sort of top level Grade 1 performer, but potentially, do you think it could go on to better things, or is that just a flash in the pan? And that's his day, and that was potentially his target, and we'll see him tail off now for the rest of the season.
Well, if you look at his record previously, Rory, especially last term, he struggled in top company. He's an inconsistent type anyway. I know he ran up a sequence a couple of seasons ago, but last term wasn't very good for him. He was on a decent mark at Chepstow last time and took advantage of it. You can question that race. I mean, he was given plenty enough rope that day and absolutely hacked up in fairness, but he beat Little Rockefeller, which wouldn't be a massive thing to me. I'm respectful of Ballyoptic in terms of him being a Nigel Twiston-Davis horse, but I wouldn't be wanting to follow him. I mean, he just doesn't strike me as a horse who's going to compete at the top table for too long. And, I don't want to be overly harsh, but this is the time of year for Nigel Twiston-Davis. What we saw a lot of on Saturday were trainers or yards in flying form, and they picked up numerous races. I mean, there was even a bounce back to form for Paul Nicholls in the big race on Saturday. This is a normal carry on. I just wouldn't want to follow him. He doesn't look the type to sequence in top class company, and I think it'd be worth taking on ground that's a little bit better. I mean, it was his type of ground, soft or heavy, wasn't it? So not for me.
Yeah, and Matt, I'll leave the last word with you. I'm quite a big Elegant Escape fan, but I couldn't have had him on Saturday. I'd like to see him. Obviously, he's going to win a Welsh national, but he's going to end up obviously having a ridiculous weight now because of his rating and what he did last year. would you potentially send him over the big fences? Do you think the Grand National will be his target this year, or will it be another crack at the Gold Cup? Or would it even be a case of Gold Cup prep run, which we're seeing a lot now, prior to a tilt at Aintree?
Well, I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be quite tricky to place, isn't he? Obviously, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's the type of horse that could carry a massive weight in another Welsh National. I think. I don't think weight would be an issue for him. He's a big, strong horse. I think he obviously lacks the class of a Gold Cup. If he's ever going to feature at the business end of a Gold Cup, I think probably he's going to have to take advantage of some misfortune of other horses. I think it'd have to be particularly testing ground. I think if he ran in a Gold Cup, he'd run creditably. In terms of a national, I just think because of the nature of the Grand National now, I think it's run on slightly better ground. It's in the spring. I think the nature of the fences now, they're a lot smaller and they're a lot softer, and they go quick. They go quick in the Nationals now, and I think if he didn't take to the fences, over the first 5 down to Beaches the first time, I think he could be out of the race before it's even started. So he wouldn't strike me as a national type.
Yeah, and Chris, obviously moving on, chaps. Chris, you mentioned earlier the big race that was at Aintree. I think it was the Sodexo. Is that what it was? For those that didn't see it, go and check it out. I'm sure it'll be doing the round on social media. But 2 Paul Nicholls horses coming to the last. Basically, for want of a better term, one veers into the other. Capeland gets pushed into the rail, while stablemate jumps the fence potentially. However, massive argument as to whether or not the horse actually jumped the fence. It certainly jumped and went over some of the brush. However, I don't know what the correct term is. You perhaps should help me out here, Matt. But the higher part of the fence that you see either side of the
wing.
fence, that's no. Hang on, isn't the wing the railing?
Well,
yeah, the wing's the plastic rails. Yeah, and before we go any further, I don't know if you want to. I don't think it was the Sodexo Chase, was it? I think the Sodexo Chase was the 3 mile one that Vindication won. I can't remember the name of the 2 mile handicap, but.
It's that one. But it was.
You have to get your old editorial skills onto that.
Oh, forget it. Keep it in. I'm human. But obviously, it was in the stewards' inquiry. It was in the stewards' room for a good while, and it was on ITV Racing. It was a debate as to whether or not it jumped the fence or not. Personally, for what it's worth, I'll give my opinion. Now, I know that I obviously tipped the horse and it won, and I tipped it on the podcast. If you got on, happy days, fantastic. But there's been that many looks at this and angles and different things going round. I personally think, and it still leaves it in a grey area, whereas I think the left-hand side of the horse's body jumps thin air, the right-hand side of the horse's body jumps a bit of fence. Now, I think because of how infrequent this sort of thing is, you then get to a position where it's, well, how much of the horse's body needs to clear a fence? What part of the fence does the horse need to clear? So on and so forth. And there's no definitive answer as far as I could tell. When ITV were doing the rounds and they were waiting for this result to come in, no one, and even after the fact, no one really gave a definitive answer or a definitive ruling as this is what the ruling is. It's black and white. A horse needs to do X, Y, and Z in order for it to qualify as jumping said fence. I know you've got strong thoughts on it, Chris. I'll let you take the mic.
Yeah, well, this was an absolute shower of shit all around. I'm sorry to say it, but how Diego de Charmil has been allowed to keep this race is totally beyond me. It's a multi-layered subject, and I'll try to be quick on it. But look, the fences are designed to be jumped by the whole of the horse. So fair enough if you don't jump the middle of the fence, fine, or if you smash through the bottom of it, whatever. But the plan is to jump the fences. That is what they're there for. And if you look at the head-on and you look at pictures and the stills that we're seeing afterwards, the whole of the horse does not pass the whole of the fence. I don't care if there's a grey area or there is no rule as such on it. that is what the whole point of jumps racing is for. So for me, he took an incorrect course and should have been disqualified on that alone. If you want to move on a little bit further, I mean, Capeland was disqualified. He had to be disqualified because he clearly didn't jump the last fence at all. Now, you can talk all day about how he was hampered, this, that, and the other, which is fine. You could also say on that regard, as Diego Du Charmil has caused such bad interference that he should have been thrown out on that alone. I would agree with that as well. There are 2 cases for him to be thrown out, and in my opinion, the stewards, they've absolutely sunk it. I mean, if this weren't a Paul Nicholls horse, it's guaranteed to be thrown out. Going on further, Diego Du Charmil, fair enough, he might have been distracted by a loose horse, actually, but he was obviously deciding, I'm not jumping this last fence at all, and Lorcan Williams, his jockey, had his whip in his right hand, and now so did Bryony Foster on Capeland, but Lorcan Williams never once pulled his whip through to try and correct this drift. I mean, that just brings up another argument entirely, the whole whip debate and what it's used for and this, that and the other. But the fact of the matter is that Lorcan Williams never received any punishment whatsoever, neither did Diego Du Charmil, and the poor owners of Capeland who got disqualified. I mean, you could not blame Bryony Frost for that incident. You couldn't blame the horse. I absolutely agree that Capeland had to be disqualified, but there are so many different levels you could disqualify Diego Du Charmil on, and look, well done to Rory for tipping him and everyone else who had a few quid on, but you would be absolutely sick seeing a result like that being allowed to stand. It was incompetence of the highest order from the stewards, and we never heard we never had anything definitively answered. Dreadful situation, farcical.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Chris has touched upon it there, Matt, and I'll come to you. It's obviously something that you expressed before we started recording, whereby forget the whole fence incident, forget whether or not Diego Du Charmil jumped the correct part of the fence, jumped it at all, so on and so forth. Prior to that horse has veered significantly to the left and caused another horse, due to interference, potential chance of winning the race. I mean, it's not as if Diego Du Charmil was pulling clear or was, a couple of lengths ahead. The second, well, sorry, it wasn't the second in the end. But Capeland was well and truly in that race coming to the last. I'm going to throw this out to you, Matt. Do you think if that was a flat race and there was no fence, that sort of level of interference would have cost Diego Du Charmil the race in the steward's room anyway?
Well. Firstly, I'd like to say well done for flagging up Diego Du Charmil on the previous podcast. That was a good shout.
Well, well, put it this way: it's bad when you have to have every man and his dog, including the stewards, helping you get a winner. So, anyone who's listening, forget any tips I'm going to give for the rest of the season. That's it, one and done.
I mean, slightly galling for me because I actually tipped the second horse, ultimately the second horse in Clondall Castle, and I thought he ran well. But going back to the main point, I won't disagree with anything that Chris has said. I think the majority of it I'd agree with. I think he summed it up well. I think it's a grey area for me slightly about whether the horse actually jumped. He sort of went through the extended birch to the left hand side of the fence. He made an effort to jump the fence. He probably got as high off the ground as the fence. Whether he actually missed the fence or not, I guess that's a slightly grey area. But if they'd have both jumped the last, I think predominantly Diego Du Charmil would have won the race if they'd have both kept the straight course down to the last, jumped the last. I still think Diego Du Charmil was the most likely winner, but there wasn't a lot in it. And I think if you imagine those two horses jumped the last upsides and then Diego Du Charmil 50 yards after the last that did what he did before the fence, undoubtedly he's getting thrown out 100%. If he careers across Capeland the way he did 50 yards before the fence, if he'd have done that 50 yards after the fence, without doubt he gets disqualified every day of the week. So I think for me that's the most crucial point. And it seemed to me on the day that wasn't even a consideration. I think they got so absorbed with whether Diego Du Charmil actually jumped the fence or not. I think that was almost an afterthought whether Diego caused enough interference actually to deny Capeland a winning chance. I think that was the key factor for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. in such a I think it was quite a severe veer as well. That, take away a fence if that was like I said, if that was run on the flat and the horse did that, and it's gonna, the likelihood is without any sort of corrective measure, which there wasn't from any jockey, either Logan Williams or Bryony Frost, then the end of the day, Capeland's going to end up at least, I'd probably say, halfway across the track, cost it the race, or cost it at least a chance, and that's it, done. But in a word, and I'll come to you, Chris. Yes or no? Did Diego de Charmel jump that fence properly?
No.
Matt?
Grey area for me.
See, I'm with Matt. I'm sitting on the. Believe it or not, we're sitting on the fence. Right, move on, chaps. Saturday, obviously preceded by Friday, in which we saw the. I don't know if it'd be the rerunning because it wasn't run, but the rescheduled Group 1 flat race that was meant to have taken place the previous Saturday at Doncaster. It was switched to a Friday evening at Newcastle. Bit of an odd one, personally, as Newmarket ended up renewing the is it the Horace Hill?
Yeah,
that's it. Ended up renewing the Horace Hill. I would have probably kept it on turf, and sent it to Newmarket if they had to rerun the race. I know you've got a lot to say about it, Chris, but I'll come to you first, Matt. Bit of an odd decision to do a Friday evening meeting at Newmarket. I mean, for what it's worth, for what I've worth, and I've seen various views flying around, but let's be honest, it's a Group 1. The sponsors will have obviously paid quite a pretty penny to have that televised. And obviously the prestige of it being at Doncaster, one of the premium turf tracks. Obviously for it to be on Saturday, so in terms of footfall, they get that as well as obviously the TV coverage with it being on ITV Racing. I would personally say that if that race had been rescheduled to Newmarket the following Saturday, it would have gotten on ITV. That personally, I think there'd been no way they would have dismissed that race. But to go to a Friday evening card, whereby it's an evening meeting from, and let's be honest, I love my all-weather. Anyone who's known me for years, I absolutely love a bit of all-weather action, especially a Friday evening. That's my sort of bread and butter and sort of go-to as a punter and tipping. But with that in mind, it's so different and such worlds apart from what was originally on the table. Now, obviously, it's no one's fault in terms of the weather. It is what it is. But if you sponsored that race, wouldn't you be disappointed, Matt?
Well, let's talk about the positives first. I mean, I think we ultimately saw a very good winner in Kamiko, very impressive, by Kitten's Joy. So arguably the switch to the synthetic service probably aided his course. Obviously good news for Newcastle. They've staged a Group 1 event at their race course, which obviously after they changed from turf to all weather was probably seemed incredibly unlikely, but it's gone ahead and happened. And in terms of sponsorship, I can only imagine, because of John Dance, the actual sponsor, his company sponsored the race. I imagine he had a massive influence on the race being run in the north, moved from Doncaster to another northern track rather than having the alternative. I don't even know whether it was an alternative option to run at Newmarket, but I can imagine he had quite a large influence on keeping that particular race in the north. That would be my take on it. I think because of he's based in the north and his horses are trained in the north, I think he probably influenced that decision and was more than happy for it to go ahead. With it on a Friday night on an all-weather track, and as a spectacle, I have to say it was quite disappointing. I imagine there was quite a lot of people missed it, other than the people at the track and a few avid racing fans tuning in to see the rearranged race. Other than good. It was lucky we had a really impressive winner, but whether the winner was flattered by the fact that it took to the surface and potentially some of the others didn't, only time will tell. But I guess it was unsatisfactory. I guess.
Chris, could you take any of that form literally from that race, or is it's such a one-off? It was on the all-weather. It was an evening meeting. It was nothing as originally advertised when the first lot of entrants were thrown in. Or potentially, here's a better question for you. Why do you think? And now I'll potentially answer my own question. Would it just have been the ground that saw more horses entered for the race at Newcastle than was originally entered for the previous Saturday at Doncaster? Is it just ground conditions? Or did the whole complete change of circumstances make it a much more open race?
Look, Rory, I mean, the one positive about this race is that it was finished and is extremely unlikely to ever happen again. You know, I don't mind supporting group races on the all-weather tracks, providing that there is a level of opposition that justifies the status of a race being a group race. This would be what I would consider a Group 2 race. There were a couple of interesting horses in it, but for a top Group 1 2-year-old race, this was absolutely dreadful. I mean, I don't care what day it was run on. I don't even care too much that it was run at Newcastle, aside from the fact that this is not an all-weather race. I mean, this cannot be ever repeated again. Just from the breeding point of view of this, I mean, you could have a superstar on the turf in here. We don't know. Kinross was very highly thought of. A couple of the Aidan O'Brien horses were highly thought of. If they have issues next season, Rory, or have to be retired, their shed values just took an almighty nosedive.
But surely that's Connection's fault for entering them into a race. I mean, they could have pulled those horses quite willingly within the 5 or 6 days.
Yes, but Rory, this will be the last 2-year-old Group 1 race of the season on these shores, or one. Well, I think it is. If it isn't, it's one of the very last. And from a breeding,
I think it is.
Well, from a breeding perspective, Rory, some of them horses have never even run in Group 1 company. You know, to prove that you are a top-end 2-year-old in the sheds is massive, especially for a team like Coolmore. It was a dreadful situation. Like I said, if you want to have Group 1s on the all-weather, fine, then get the opposition. This was never a Group 1. It should never happen again, and it was just embarrassing all round.
Do you take the form literally, or is it going to mean absolutely nothing next year?
Kamiko's a nice horse, obviously, but he's exposed to a level, I guess. I mean, he's been beaten the last couple of times. Innisfree won the Beresford the time before and ran second at 11-1. He was quite unconsidered in the betting. That surprised me a little bit. And Mogul, although comfortably beaten, ran okay, I guess, but I wouldn't trust this form one bit. And the whole reason being, Rory, where they're going to run next season at Newcastle in a Group 1. They're not going to get an all-weather Group 1 next term, so unfortunately, I think you have to dismiss the form and the race and the whole credibility of the race as well. It's not a good situation, and hopefully, like I said, they don't repeat it.
Sticking with the flat Japs, we went stateside. Can I just make
Rory, can I just make a couple of points on that?
Go for it, man. Go for it.
Again. 2 points I'd like to bring up is that, like yourselves, Chris and yourself and other people that have listened to this podcast know I'm a massive fan of Kinross. I was obviously disappointed with his effort on Friday night. I thought he, after being squeezed along at the 3 marker and he travelled up behind the leaders, he looked the winner for me. And then when pulled out, he found disappointingly little. I was absolutely amazed that the Connections decided to go to Newcastle on the other. Could have gone and picked up is it Group 2, Horace Hill, Group 3, Group 2?
Yeah.
When they could have gone to a track where the horse had already won on similar ground conditions against arguably inferior opposition. it really amazed me that they didn't take the Horace Hill option, because obviously the horse was in the original Horace Hill at Newbury on ground that was obviously ultimately unraceable. They could have had their exact conditions to which that horse was incredibly impressive on its debut at Newmarket, and they chose to take him to a completely different environment at Newcastle on the weather over a furlong further, and I just found that a really odd decision in terms of the horse's progress. I think he would have won the Horace Hill. I mean, fair shout to Chris. He mentioned Kensai Warrior, the win of the rearranged Horace Hill in the previous podcast, and it was a good win for Roger Teal. Hope that horse does well in the future. But I thought that was a really bizarre decision to then switch tack and go to Newcastle. The second point I'd like to make is that, what is Aidan O'Brien's best 2-year-old currently? Because he's had a lot of them beat now, and I got the feeling that Mogul was possibly thought of as one of the leading lights, and whether he didn't act at Newcastle is anyone's guess. But he's got a lot of decent 2-year-olds, Aidan O'Brien, but I don't think he's got any standout ones this year. By how it looks at the moment, I don't know what you guys think about that.
Chris, do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I'd say probably the most interesting 2-year-old most interesting horse he has going forward that we've seen is probably Wichita. Still looks babyish to me. There's definitely improvement there with him. I don't know what his trip's going to be, but I think he will make a good 3-year-old. But like Matt says, I mean, a lot of them have been exposed when they've dined at the top table, and you never want to dismiss Aidan O'Brien when you come round to the Guineas, but there doesn't appear to be anything there, does there? I mean, the Guineas is almost... You have to say now that the Guineas, or the 2000 Guineas, is Pinatu Bus to lose. It would be a major upset if anything that has already raced managed to turn him over. So, I mean, it is surprising, isn't it? But, I mean, what can you say? He usually finds something, and that's about it.
I think sometimes with the Ballydoyle, sometimes you'll find a horse that's perhaps raced once as a 2-year-old, won a maiden, gets put away and handled with kid gloves, it comes out for some sort of Guineas trial and absolutely obliterates everything, and then everyone goes, "Oh, hang on a minute." It's not ridiculous to think that he's perhaps got one, maybe two that have only raced once or twice in really poor races.
If you think historically, most of his Guineas winners have been quite well campaigned as 2-year-olds.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good point.
He's not scared to run them, is he?
No.
No.
I mean, we were looking the other weekend, weren't we, at the amount of, you know what, I'm just going to call it the Racing Post Trophy, because that's what it is to me. The amount of winners he's had of that over, I think it was something ridiculous, like 5 of the last 8 or something like that. So, you're absolutely right, and he campaigns them up all the way up to the end of the season as well. Moving on, chaps, though, sticking with the flat, sticking with O'Brien's, we obviously went stateside and saw the Breeders' Cup, sort of meeting over there. Unfortunately, a lot of the build-up for what was in the press was the sad fatality rate of horses racing in this meeting. We'll come on to that, but focusing on a positive, Ballydoyle's prodigy in the making, potentially after Aidan hangs up his gloves, so to speak, is his son Joseph. At the age of 26, has ridden multiple Group 1 winners and trained Group 1 winners, including Iridessa, that went over and won in the US. Now, I hate to be a party pooper and I hate to sound like a grumpy old man. And, at the end of the day, he had to sit on those horses and ride them. He had to train those horses to get them where they were and to achieve what they've done. But let's be honest, he's been given such an opportunity to compare to the average 26-year-old that I could potentially argue that 50% of jockeys who were given the ammunition he was given as a jockey, and 50% of trainers who have been given some of the ammunition he's had as a trainer, could have achieved just as much as he's achieved. Maybe that's very unfair, and don't get me wrong, yeah. He's done what he's done, and it's brilliant. But that, personally, that's something that just kind of takes the shine off it a little bit for me. You know, don't get me wrong. If Joseph O'Brien had sat on one of my horses, and you know, one day I own one, but and ridden it to Group 1 success, it'd be, you know, the second coming to me. Or he'd trained one of my horses to win at Group 1. Again, I think the sun shone out of him. But am I just being really unfair, Matt? Thinking like that?
Yes, you are being really unfair, Rory.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Really? What, he was given the top job at Ballydoyle at whatever age as a jockey, and
I think the thing is, it's like there's been lots of other people in. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the O'Brien
I would probably
dynasty,
say more so as a jockey than a trainer, to be fair.
Yeah. So the O'Brien dynasty is a phenomenon, and I mean, let's get that straight. So yes, you're definitely right. Is that they're in a privileged position. But the one that both Joseph and Donica and the other children to a certain extent, but you've still got to be able to do the job. They're still given these horses, and don't get me wrong, it's easier to train good horses than it is to train bad horses, but you've still got to get the job done. The thing I like mostly about Aidan and his children is that the fact that they're so humble. There's not a hint of arrogance about them at all. They know they're in a privileged position. They admit that they're in a privileged position. They're very thankful and grateful for where they are. They're like incredibly hardworking. I mean, Aidan, even when he comes across to Newmarket to watch a Guineas, he'll be back in Ireland the next morning to watch First Lot Canter. They're so they're so focused on success. And you know, I've known other people that have been in privileged positions and absolutely cocked it up because they're talentless. I'm not going to name any names, but you know, I'm sure.
Muted myself then. I was laughing. Go on. Go on. Let's make this podcast go viral. Scandal.
Okay. They're in a like I reiterate. There has been other people I know that have had the silver spoon treatment and not had the ability to see it through and follow in their predecessors' footsteps. And so I've got nothing but respect for them, to be honest. Yeah, of course they're in a privileged position, but you know, I just think they're absolute geniuses. I mean, I was going to big up to Joseph anyway. I mean, if you think, you know, youngest ever jockey to ride a Breeders' Cup winner, youngest ever trainer now to train a Breeders' Cup winner. What he's done with that filly, you know, especially a filly as well, because we know fillies can be slightly delicate and touchy. To have her on the go, to run in a Guineas trial and then an English Guineas, and to be winning a Grade 1 in America on firm ground in heat let's be honest, an awful track. I mean, whose idea it is to run it round a postage stamp is anyone's guess. It's like absolutely phenomenal. I mean, fantastic ride from Wayne Lord and had her in exactly the right place. What a tough mare! What a really tough filly to have won that race, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And hats off. That's how I feel.
Chris.
Yeah, I think you've been very harsh there, Rory. I mean, look, obviously he's had the leg up, but to have such.
See, normally you're the grumpy one, but I thought, well, I'll give it a try. Go on.
Well, yeah, but look,
convert me to the dark side.
I have nothing but respect for the young man. I mean, he's 26 years old. You know, it's all good and well having these good horses to ride as a jockey, but there's a certain amount of pressure that comes with that, and even more so when you consider that he's Aidan O'Brien's son. You know, the microscope has always been firmly upon him, and I mean, well, look, whether he was as good a jockey as the likes of Ryan Moore or Frank Dettori is open to debate, but he was certainly a successful and trustworthy jockey on his day, Rory, and they're not just going to allow, you know, talentless pricks riding their horses. There's a lot of money involved. You know, in terms of his training performances, I mean, this guy's had winners at the Cheltenham Festival. You know, he's had Group 1 winners now in America at the Breeders' Cup. He's 26. You know, the amount of pressure that this young man is under, I think it is admirable. And as Matt's already said, yes, it might be easy to train good horses, but it is easy to make a pig's ear of it. So I have nothing but respect and admiration for them. I think as a racing dynasty, like Matt's already touched upon, I mean, this is something to be celebrated. He was a a massive achievement. And there is every chance that in 10, 15 years' time we'll be talking of Joseph in the same breath and with the same respect that we talked about Aidan.
Yeah, all right. Well done, Joseph. I'll just shut up and be quiet.
It's funny when you'll have to edit this out. Funny when Chris said they don't have talentless pricks riding their horse. A lot of money involved. I wanted to jump in there and say they actually retained Jamie Spencer for a season.
Well, that's staying in. I tell you, Matt.
Don't edit that.
Cut that out.
We're all jovial and everything, but as I touched upon earlier, and I know it's something that you wanted to discuss, Matt, sadly, one of the big things, or one of the things that was making the news, was the amount of fatalities at this meeting previously, and it was the last race, and sadly a horse has been put down, but there's more to it than that. I'll let you take over the story, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously Santa Anita has been in the news lately due to the number of fatalities there's been over this calendar year. I think there was a slight element of apprehension and nail biting. It had a feel of a Grand National weekend almost, where you sort of just hope and pray that everything goes smoothly without any hiccups. And obviously it started on the Friday night, so we ultimately had 14 championship races, and everything was going well until the final race, sadly, the Breeders' Cup Classic, the most valuable race on the card, and one of the horses, Mongolian Groom, sadly sustained an injury to a left hind leg and had to be humanely destroyed. Obviously sad, obviously tragic for all the connections involved, the groom and the owners and the trainers and everything. But unfortunately, it's came to light over the last day or so, where a video has been posted of the said horse, Mongolian Groom, trotting on the racecourse on the 26th of October, which was almost a week before the Breeders' Cup Classic. And sadly, the horse is obviously lame, left hind, which was sadly the leg the injury occurred on. And me being obviously an avid racing fan, having worked within the industry and now obviously currently working in the veterinary side of the industry, I will defend racing to the hilt, because it's my passion. It's what I love. But to see a horse trotting 3/10 lane a week before it's due to run in a race is indefensible, to be honest. Literally, I mean, you can't defend that. So, that's a very moot point as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you never want to see it, but with that video coming out, unfortunately, it's as a racing fan, like you said, it's unjustifiable. You can't say or do anything to try and defend such actions. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you agree with this, but at the end of the day, it's greed and money far surpassing what's best for the horse and the horse's welfare and health and well-being. Would you probably say, Matt?
Well, I'd like to think that it wasn't as simple as that. It wasn't as just something that wasn't overlooked. I mean, the horse was obviously lame. I mean, there are many different factors when it comes to racehorses, particularly racehorses that have raced a few times. When they get to a certain age, they will carry niggles. They do have off days. They do have, like any athlete, they will be sore some days, and it's the trainer's responsibility to manage those situations and to know your horse and to know its little foibles, its little idiosyncrasies, and to manage its training and its racing around those little issues that they have. And racehorses will be lame on and off like constantly. But I think the fact that it's now, that video is now on social media, and the fact that the horse was so obviously lame, and it was lame on the leg that sadly it fractured during the race. I mean, it just doesn't look good, and it does leave a sour taste in everyone's mouth. I'd like to think that there was a reason behind it, and it wasn't just the fact, well, we're entered in a grade one that's worth however many $1 million. Let's just run. But from an outsider's point of view, that's almost how it looks. But definitely leaves a slight sour taste, I have to say.
Yeah, sadly we won't dwell on it. Moving to the nicer side of racing, shall we say, and try and end this podcast on a more promising note. So obviously we saw two horses run at the weekend. One on Friday over in Ireland, in the form of Samcro, and obviously Lostintranslation, returning to winning ways on Sunday. Lostintranslation, everyone went a bit cock-a-hoop for that horse. Some people are on sort of full steam ahead, potentially the next best thing. Where do you sort of lie? Do you think that not much can be taken into consideration after just that race, or are you aboard the hype train?
Yeah, I think probably the former. I think the most satisfactory thing about both horses is that they obviously showed their well-being. They both jumped well, and they both won their races comfortably. I don't think they were particularly good races they won. I'll start with Lostintranslation. He was left on his own to do his own thing in front. Jumped immaculately, to be fair, but he was only going to school in gallop, and the other three runners competition in the race were just happy to let him have his own way in front. At no point was he ever put under any pressure by any of the opposition, so Robbie Power basically just schooled him round there, and obviously the horse has got gears, and he just quickened up slightly up the straight and left some slightly inferior horses in his wake. And I notice a lot of people on social media have been getting carried away talking about Gold Cups and things, but I think he was entitled to win as he did, and I would certainly want to see some more before I'd be getting too carried away about that. It was just a nice, satisfactory performance, and I could pretty much sum Samcro's performance up similarly. He hasn't won a particularly good race, but I think the most pleasing thing is that obviously after all the hype around his novice hurdle season, and then obviously he's come back the following season where he was ultimately disappointing, and then there was stories of him having lung infections, etc. Just the fact that he's back on the track and he won his race in a satisfactory manner. He jumped okay, he jumped a little bit out to the right, but first time over fences. I thought it was satisfactory and no more than that. And I think, like I said, I think I could basically sum the two horses up with the same sentiments, really. I think satisfactory without going overboard. Just a nice start to the season.
So I want to come to you with this, Chris. Obviously, we had the two horses, the aforementioned horses, that have made their seasonal reappearance, both Samcro and Lostintranslation. In a few words, if we're doing a podcast in April of next year and we're looking back, which of those two do you think is going to have had a better season over the next 6 or so months?
It's a really difficult one, this, Roy, because obviously Samcro is going to be novice chasing this season. He was very highly thought of last term and traded as favourite for the champion hurdle, which was absolutely baffling for my money. And he, the only thing I can think of why they stayed over hurdles was that he perhaps tipped up or didn't school well over fences at the time, so I'd be wary of him. I know he was impressive at Down Royal the other day, but beating Trappist Monk and 100 to 1 shot in third doesn't do that much for me. Dortmund Park was very disappointing as well. I just have question marks with Samcro. I wonder if he's got a rick over fences in him, and he has already proven disappointing and costly at the top end over hurdles. So whilst I think he will make his mark as a novice, I wouldn't be falling in love with him at short prices for the Cheltenham Festival. And Lostintranslation, who I do like very much. I mean, he's run some very good races in his time. He gave Defi Desoy a good race at Cheltenham. He's got an appealing and attractive profile of an improving type of horse. I'm not totally convinced he's a Gold Cup player just yet. I mean, single figure odds again, a little bit like Delta Work. He hasn't proven anything at the top table yet, so to speak. He was impressive over the jumps the other day, and I expect him to develop into a top class type of horse, but I wouldn't be entirely sure about the Gold Cup with him. I think he looks like a Ryanair type to me. However, gun to head, if you wanted me to own one, Lost in Translation will be the one for me, because he's a proven very good chaser already, and he jumps really, really well. So I prefer to own Lost in Translation. I can see Samcro making his mark, but Lost in Translation for me.
So obviously, Matt, we saw over the weekend as well in Ireland. ITV took a race in Down Royal even. Road to Riches, innit? Or Road to Respect? Road to Riches.
Road to Respect, yeah.
Road to Respect, sorry. Took the grade one. Beat the more well-fancied horses, a fellow Kingstown runner, and also Nichols' runner, whose names have both complete Clanderzobo and, remind me, who was the favourite?
Delta Work, Clanderzobo.
Delta Work, that's the one. Yeah, I know that you like the horse and you tipped up the winner. Thoughts on the race and what can we take out of it really going forward, Matt?
Well, yeah, I think I fancy. Talk horses for courses, isn't it? We often say that, don't we? And Road to Respect as a course and distance winner, usually runs well fresh. He was just, I think, as I said in the podcast, I think there was just enough chinks in the front two in the market in Delta Work and Clanderzobo was enough just to tilt me in the favour of Road to Respect, and he duly obliged. But I thought Clanderzobo ran a mighty race on his seasonal debut, jumped beautifully, travelled beautifully. I'm still convinced undulating tracks such as Down Royal probably don't, and even Cheltenham to a certain extent don't suit the horse. I think he likes flat tracks. I think he's more of a Haydock and a Kempton Ascot type of horse. But he run a mighty race. And Delta Work was the horse I obviously flagged up as not looking like a natural chaser to me. I think he lacks a bit of scope, and as I said before, I think he just jumping fences looks hard work for him. And I think especially against these seasoned campaigners, these genuine Grade 1 horses, they're slick operators, and I think just getting from A to B to him for him just looks hard work sometimes, and so it proved. He missed at least half a dozen fences out on the way round where he just wasn't fluent enough, or he just got into the bottom of them, and ultimately that cost him dearly. And I think it would probably be an issue with him in all Grade 1 chases this season. So. Yeah, Road to Respect, fine winner of the race, travelled well, quickened up nicely, won the race again, and Clanderzobo, I think they'll be more than pleased with that debut performance. He ran a fine race.
Yeah, perhaps I'm being a bit unfair to the winner, but I agree with you. I think the one to take out the race is the Nichols horse. Considering that was a seasonal reappearance, he's going to certainly come on for that run as well. And Chris, obviously we've looked back at this past weekend's racing, but you've pinpointed a couple of eye catchers that you'd probably recommend our listeners throw in a notebook or certainly keep an eye on for the rest of the season. Do you want to fire those at us and the reasons why?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Speredek, who ran in the Diego de Charmo race. Now, interestingly, for a horse that likes to go from the front, he wasn't. And he didn't get to the front at any point in the race, which is very disappointing. He was fairly strong in the market, which was surprising given the way he was ridden by Sean Bowen. However, he was allowed to coast round anyway when he was beaten, and he still finished a respectable 7th. He was promoted into 6th. I think, he's going to find races, this horse, there's no doubt about it. And once he gets on at the front end, he can jump his rivals into submission. So I wouldn't lose any sleep on him moving forwards. Another one, and this is a little bit controversial, is Delta Work. This would be one I would be willing to get after. He has had numerous flaws with his jumping. They surfaced at Cheltenham last season where a couple of ricks cost him badly in the RSA. He was readily brushed aside at the weekend now, albeit by good horses like Road to Respect and Clanderzobo. but the fact he couldn't beat Alpha Disobo was very, very disappointing. I expect him to be one. I just think it's too much hard work for Del to work at the fences. He will win races, but he's a lay in top company, certainly at Cheltenham. And another really interesting eye-catcher was, it ran in the last race at Wether with a 4:10 behind Mr. Scrumpy, and the horse was trained by Venetia Williams, beg your pardon, and Bond Question is the horse in question. The horse was held up, never given a chance at all by Charlie Deutsch. I was really disappointed with the effort he made. He coasted round absolutely on the bridle. I mean, coming down to second last, he must have gone pretty short in the run, but he was never pulled out to make a challenge and blundered away whatever chance he had at the last. I think on that type of ground, very interesting horse going forward, albeit, at the low end of the scale. And the other one was in the 155 at Weatherby. This was a horse who actually unseated, and it was Zambella. Samcro Davis made plenty of use of her. I mean, she's very unexposed, French type. I think, for a good while, I thought she actually had Lady Button's number before tiring and obviously getting...
Yeah, I agree, yeah. Watching the race.
I mean, I do think that she has plenty of scope about her. I was slightly alarmed, actually, how far out Samcro Davis kicked, but she was very interesting, and if you can forgive that mishap, I think she'll strip for it the next time, and she's very, very interesting going forward.
To me, she looked potentially like she'd improve going over bigger obstacles. Obviously not this season, but potentially look like a half-decent chaser, maybe. Not a staying chaser or anything like that, but a chaser perhaps over 2 mile, 2 mile 4.
Yeah, I mean, she looked like she had a touch class about her, didn't she, Rory, to be fair? And if she'd have stayed up, I mean, it wasn't entirely out of the question that she would have been in the 3. For me, she'd have certainly been in the 3. And
well,
like
I tipped it in the newspaper as an each way shout in that race, so it was a bit gutted, to be honest, to see it hit the deck, but never mind.
Well, I can imagine you're absolutely good, mate, to be fair, but she still caught the eye, and she's an interesting one going forwards.
Yeah, indeed. So those are 3 to keep on the side and 1 to potentially go against in the form of Delta work. Yeah.
I'll just give you one other, and this ran in the main race at Ascot in the Sodexo Chase. I mean, Vindication's a very, very impressive winner, and Black Horton gives their form a very strong-looking third. He ran an absolute belter under 11 stone 12. But Go Conquer ran 6. He loves Ascot. He was very, very weak in the market. Now, look, his mark is too high at present. It needs to come down probably to a tune of £7 or £8, but it will come down, and Nigel Twiston Davis will have him right one day at Ascot. I think he'll definitely win this term, and probably at Ascot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connolly. Well, you've heard his thoughts as well. Right, that being said, Matt, I think we've done 40-odd minutes worth. I think we've probably bored everyone enough. Chris had to dash off, but we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure you stay tuned on Thursday or Friday. And we'll be previewing this Saturday's action and anything else going on over the weekend. Stay tuned.